With the recent revival of the Tsukihime franchise, with 2 released video games and an upcoming one on the line, we thought it would be a very good opportunity to revisit some of the older Tsukihime products. Among these we have the original novel released in 2000, becoming a huge hit in Japan. The novel, or eroge really, spawned several products, such as mangas and a fighting game called Melty Blood, which ironically overshadowed the Tsukihime novel, but that's a different can of worms that we might or might not cover in the future. We also have the anime adaptation of the show called Carnival Phantasm, a comedy anime which is basically a crossover between Tsukihime and Fate. Yeah, and we thought this Spider-Verse was ambitious. With that in mind, we'll talk about the anime adaptation of Tsukihime. So here we go. Carnival Phantasm was released on... Alright, there's this common joke in the community where people state that there's no Tsukihime anime. I honestly thought it was a dumb joke. And it is. Sort of. So, out of curiosity, we watched the show to give it a fair chance. We want to be clear from the get-go, we're not experts on the Tsukihime franchise. We have played the fighting games, and my friend here is still playing the novel because it is a universe that he's really interested in. But my god. Even without in-depth knowledge of the Tsukihime universe, we can confirm that there's no Tsukihime anime isn't a joke. It's a warning. The anime has so many issues that I honestly don't know where to start. So first let's introduce this anime audiovisual product from now on.
Lunar Legend Tsukihime is an audiovisual product released in 2003. It's 12 episodes long and in paper it encompasses the arcade route from the novel. However, because it was kinda difficult to adapt an entire visual novel route on 12 episodes, some changes were made. Of course, it is expected to have some modifications to fit everything on a short audiovisual product. However, among these modifications we have changing character traits, which is not the best thing to modify. Anyway, the audiovisual product was animated by Studio JC staff, and from the looks of it, it was premiered on Animax. Wow, that's ancient shit. And follows the story of Chikitono, a teenager who has a special ability. He can see lines on objects, and when he cuts them, he can destroy such objects, which includes people. He obtained this ability after a life-threatening injury, more on this later, and the way he can suppress this power is by using some special glasses. After returning to his normal life, kind of, he kills the female protagonist, Arcade Brunestud, but because she's a vampire she survives, somehow. And that's where the story begins. There's more than that, but that's the gist. I'll admit, we didn't come to this series with the highest expectations, but can you really blame us when the most you hear about it in discussions is that the anime doesn't exist? Well, the first couple of episodes weren't too bad, with decent animation and a pretty good build-up for the mystery side of the show. Hell, it even made us think that it wasn't really that bad and people were just exaggerating or following a meme. How foolish we were! It only takes about 2 to 3 episodes for the cracks to start showing, with many moments of tension being dragged out for too long, sometimes making me question if the video was actually buffering. The vocal delivery was quite dry at various points, and the characters themselves didn't offer all that much. All these aspects started to pile up to make it, not very enjoyable. As I said before, our expectations were very low starting the series, and although it managed to grab us at the beginning, it was just the start of a pretty rocky road downhill. I won't tell you it's the worst thing we have seen, as there are some merits to the production, but this segment is here just to recount our first impressions of the show. Oh boy, where do I even start to talk about the story of this thing? Well, as we specified before, the anime sorta covers the arcade route from the game, with some differences that are to be expected in this kind of adaptation. Now, while Tsukihime isn't a simple story by any means, its barrier of entry is not that hard if you take the time to approach it. With that said, 12 episodes is not enough time. terms are skimmed over, the story doesn't keep a good pace, and characters are underdeveloped or misrepresented.
Things like true ancestors and dead apostles can't be summarized as spirits and vampires without losing a lot of the nuance behind, although the anime takes like a whole minute to explain it. A way to simplify the correlation between true ancestors and dead apostles could be by comparing them to the Pillarmen and vampires from JoJo. The former are the original vampires with their various abilities specific to each of them, while the latter are created by the original vampires, needing blood to survive and posing the threat of creating more like themselves. The episodes sometimes slow to a crawl or do things with little setup beforehand, taking you out of the immersion. And when talking about characters, there are even more issues. If you only watch the series, you'd leave thinking that Shiki is just a sad student thrown into this conflict by a moment of hysteria, ignoring the subconscious murderous intent that's developed throughout the various routes of the novel. Arquette lacks a lot of the more whimsical aspects of her personality. While she's supposed to be a character that's pure emotion-wise, the show makes her look a lot more serious and blunt. Although this perception could be slightly altered due to the change in art style, it does not excuse it completely. I had to keep the wiki and the visual novel at hand, both when watching and while writing this section, because the series left me with more questions than answers. This led me to another discovery. The series makes the barrier of entry to Tsukihime too high by avoiding details, while annoying longtime fans by misrepresenting the source material. Taking a little over 60 seconds of a whole 12-episode anime to barely explain two of the most important concepts to the franchise is a disservice to Tsukihime as a whole. If we just cut all the pauses in the series by half, we would have more than enough time to explain the concepts in full. During our first watch, our opinion about the animation was less than favorable. However, after rewatching the show and looking into the year of its release, 2003, we can say that the animation is decent enough, at least for 2003 standards. Our main gripes with the anime remain though, some of those issues coming mainly from the direction of the show. For example, certain scenes drag out for an eternity, with awkward and long pauses for no reason. We can assume that they were made to add more tension to the show, adding the feeling of mystery and suspense from the visual novel, but it didn't accomplish such a purpose. In scenes where this approach was taken, nothing was really happening, be it plot-wise or animation-wise, harming the rhythm of the story.
In other scenes, the animation simply looks bad. One of the best examples is this rather infamous scene in the elevator, where you can see Shiki stabbing Nero's hand, but rather than conveying tension and despair, it looked funny as hell. While this specific scene isn't representative of the entire show, kind of, it shows some of the dips in the animation that Tsukihime has every now and then, where it looks less than stellar. Among other controversial aspects of this audiovisual product are some of the character designs. It certainly looks different from the original art, for sure, but that can be expected from an anime adaptation, streamlining the art to make it easier to animate. That being said, characters like Nero Chaos look overly simplified, taking away the uniqueness of the character design. Another example will be Kohaku, where her cheerful demeanor is simply missing, looking like a generic and quiet maid, which is even worse when we consider that her sister Hisui is supposed to be the quiet one of the two.
However, the anime excels sound-wise. The soundtrack is simply amazing and pretty much carries the entire series. The opening of the show conveys the tone, or the intended tone, of the anime. Tension, action, and heartwarming moments are conveyed through other tracks, making very powerful scenes just by them alone. It is certainly the highlight of Lunar Legend Tsukihime, and made the show bearable enough to go through the entire runtime. If the soundtrack was bad like other aspects of the show, I wouldn't have finished it in the first place. While I didn't like the voices during the first watch, I got kinda used to them after rewatching it a few times. While the tone of the series is more inclined towards mystery and suspense, sometimes the delivery struck me as boring more than anything, especially in scenes where there was no music. This is sometimes made worse when the animation issues overlap. Talk about a more iconic duo.
Production value. Very decent for 2003 standards. Soundtrack is amazing. The voices and animation are alright, but when the technical aspects flop, it's a shitstorm. Scenes that look bad or drag out for too long really kill the mood and immersion of the story. That being said, the soundtrack is again amazing, so some scenes were carried simply by its quality alone. 3 out of 5 here. Storytelling. Saying that Tsukihime lore is convoluted will be an understatement. That being said, the anime hardly explains some of the concepts of the universe, so it feels like it barely scratched the surface. There's a lot of lore and story in the original novel, and while I wasn't expecting Kojima levels of exposition, more context will be appreciated. Alas, the story wasn't well explained, and it feels like the writers expected that the audience already read the novel, but they didn't want to commit to the target audience, so they simplified everything to not confuse newcomers, but made everything worse in the process. 2 out of 5. Characters. I don't think that the anime made justice to most of them. While they have more lore and backstory, the anime didn't go that far on most of them. Shiki looks bored and sad, and Arcuit doesn't feel like this pure and carefree girl as she was originally portrayed. I know that this is a mystery show, but everyone looks so depressed that characters look boring and plain most of the time. I'm feeling generous, because there were some decent moments in the show, and some of the nuances of the novel were present, so I guess a 3 out of 5 should be right here. Enjoyment. The first time I watched the show was terrible. It felt like an eternity at some points, so the experience was negative, to say the least. Upon rewatching it though, it wasn't that bad, and we got to appreciate some of the aspects of the show a bit more. We are not saying that the anime is good now, in fact we believe it's a bad show, but as long as Cool Days and Riddle Healer exist, Lunar Legend Tsukihime won't be the worst of the bunch. It's boring, yes, but a harmless anime in the end. Assuming you are not a fan of the Tsukihime universe, of course. If you are, I won't blame you for denying its existence and pray it becomes lost media in a few years. 2 out of 5.
While we might have gone a bit overboard and been a little harsh towards Lunar Legend Tsukihime, we can assure you that the anime isn't really worth your time. Even taking away your negativity towards it, there isn't really much to offer. The anime is dull in a lot of areas. Sometimes the animation looks bad, voice acting was boring at some points, the universe wasn't explained thoroughly, and it wasn't a faithful adaptation by any means. The Tsukihime universe has a charm, but unfortunately it can't be found in this adaptation. Lunar Legend Tsukihime doesn't do justice to the legacy that the novel established, which is honestly very sad. We can't recommend this show unless you already played the novel, be it the original or the new one, and have some spare time to sit down and be dumbfounded by the sheer incompetence of the anime adaptation.